Hey, Larken here. Pretty often I hear people, especially people new to anarchism and voluntarism, say, what are all these different anarcho-communism, anarcho-syndicalism, minarchism, libertarianism, white nationalist, all the 8 zillion prefixes and suffixes, and I don't even know how to figure out what I am. It's all just a confusing mess. And so I wanted to point out something that's a fundamental difference between voluntarism and everything else. Now, I would also say that anarcho-capitalism is basically synonymous with voluntarism, but I'll get into that later. I'll explain why I say that later. When it comes to voluntarism, really all it is a very short description of things that you as an individual human being don't think you should do to other people, and you don't think they should do it to you. It's a very personal, individual idea that all human interaction should be voluntary, which just means it shouldn't be coercive. What we as people do together, cooperation, organization, all that, should always be by consent, where we agree, whether it's trading or we're building something together or we're just leaving each other alone. And if we can't come to a mutual agreement, then we don't do anything. We don't interact, we don't trade, whatever. We go our separate ways and we leave each other in peace. So it's actually a description of a very simple negative thing. There's no master plan involved in voluntarism. It's not trying to describe like how everybody's going to behave. It describes a way that everybody shouldn't behave, which is violently. But it doesn't at all define how anything is going to be handled. But the problem is people are used to hearing a master plan. So they will naturally say, well, if you don't have a ruling class and in voluntarism, how will this be handled? How will protection be handled? How will we take care of the poor? How will we do this, that, or the other thing? Because they're so used to somebody, especially politicians, coming along and saying, don't worry, I have a master plan. I'm going to make society work this way. I have this big program or this, law that's going to make everyone do this or this, that, or the other thing. And voluntarism is just a very simple statement of a negative, is we're not going to use coercion on each other. But that leaves wide open a zillion possibilities of how to deal with any problem you can imagine. It doesn't pretend to have a specific positive solution to anything. All it says is, let's not be violent towards each other. And that the only time force is justified is defending against somebody else who's being violently aggressive. So all it is a statement of one very fundamental negative. Don't be a violent aggressor. And that's it. It doesn't try to dictate everything. And the thing is, as soon as you accept that one premise, you can't dictate everything. You can hope, you can say how you wish people would organize things or deal with different problems, but if you don't have the power of coercion, if you've given that up because you're a voluntarist, you can suggest and you can predict and you can hope, but so what? Like, your hopes and suggestions and predictions aren't going to govern the rest of the world. So, and it's sort of, to be a little bit flippant, it's sort of like somebody saying, well, I'm an anarcho-nicist. I don't believe in a ruling class, and I hope people will be nice. Like, okay, so what? Like, I hope people will be nice too. That's not really a philosophy. That's just a hope. And when people say anarcho-communism, my first question is, well, are you just hoping people are going to organize in a communal way, or that they're going to trade in a sort of communist way and deal with property that way? Or do you plan to force people to do that? Because if you plan to force people to do that, you can get rid of the anarcho part, because whatever centralized authoritarian thing is going to force them to do that is government. So all these other anarcho-syndicalism, anarcho-communism, all sorts of other like minarchism and everything else, they all include centralized authoritarian collectivist master plans of one form or another. Here's how everything's going to work. Well, as soon as you leave people in freedom, you don't get to decide that anymore. And for a lot of people, that's uncomfortable and that's scary, to give up the illusion that they have control over other people. And to be a voluntarist, you have to give up that illusion of control, because you have to accept, hey, what they choose to do, how they choose to spend their money, how they choose to interact and all that, how they choose to deal with problems, isn't my choice anymore. Like, the only quote-unquote requirement of voluntarism is that people don't commit violent aggression. And if somebody does, other people have the right to defend themselves. But that's all the statement is. That's all it means. There's no master plan. And just about, in fact, I'm tempted to say all of them. There might be an exception. If somebody knows of an exception, feel free to let me know. As far as I can tell, all of the suffixes and complications and anarcho this, that, the other thing, or qualifiers or whatever, are trying to tack on a master plan, a description of how you want, like, trade to happen, or how you want society organized. Well, I'm an anarcho-primitivist, so you hope people live like cavemen. Well, are you going to force them to live like cavemen? Because a lot of people, including myself, don't really want to live that way. Or is it just what you kind of think would be good for society, or what you kind of hope people are going to do? Because tacking your hopes, your arbitrary hopes and dreams on the end of it, it's not really a philosophy. It's just a hope. Like, there's a lot of things about humanity right now that I criticize and don't think are good. I think people are, generally speaking, especially Americans, well, maybe everywhere, but America is where I live and that's where I see it. People are materialistic and short-sighted and superficial and stupid. I wish they wouldn't be that. But that's not part of my political or anti-political philosophy. My anti-political philosophy is voluntarism. I shouldn't commit aggression, even if they're sitting around eating crappy food by choice, voluntarily, wasting their lives, getting drugged out and playing video games and not doing anything else. I think that's really stupid and destructive. And yet, that doesn't change the fact that I'm a voluntarist, and I wouldn't, on my own or by way of government or by way of anybody else, try to force them not to do that. So my suggestions and preferences are unrelated to the philosophical thing of the non-aggression principles. I won't initiate violence against other people. And all my criticisms of their behaviors and their habits and their attitudes and their lifestyles, and who cares? That's all unrelated. Whereas all the quote-unquote philosophies that, and it isn't just anarcho, this, that, or the other thing, it's all sorts of philosophies. Minarchism and this, that. Well, we need a centralized master plan to tax everybody to pay for a government that just protects individual rights. And there's reasons that's bogus and immoral, which I've talked about before. But the point here is that's describing a centralized master plan. That isn't just a description of how you, as an individual human being, think you should treat other human beings. That's you trying to impose a master plan on all of society. And you don't get to. And so anybody who pretends to believe in freedom but then sticks a master plan on their quote-unquote philosophy doesn't believe in freedom. Doesn't believe in non-aggression. And if you say, well, mostly I believe in non-aggression, except for these things over here where I want people violently robbed to fund my master plan view of how society should be, okay, well, that's you not believing in freedom. Like, the fact that you'll mostly leave people alone, but only violently control them for A, B, and C, that doesn't make you any different from any other statist. You know, the political left are like, well, I think everyone needs to be forcibly robbed to take care of the poor and the elderly and stuff, but I don't think government should be in people's bedrooms. So I believe in freedom, except where I don't. Like, that's what every state is. Conservatives have their version of, well, I think government needs to have a huge police force and military and maybe throw people in cages for having the wrong plant. But otherwise, I believe in freedom. Well, that means you don't believe in freedom. If there's a list of aggressive violations that you condone, and then you say, but other than that, I believe in freedom. Well, that's everybody. I mean, I have yet to meet anybody, even an all-out Stalinist, who says, I all the way don't want anybody to be free to do anything at all, make any decisions at all in their entire life ever. Like, nobody believes that, which means every statist, communist, fascist, moderate, libertarian, capital L, all of them oppose freedom, and they have some master plan that they want forced on society. And the only philosophy that doesn't is voluntarism. And I think it's silly when voluntarists or anarchists try to tack on their hopes and preferences on the end as if that has something to do with the philosophy. Because it just doesn't. It's totally freaking irrelevant. What you hope people are going to do doesn't define your philosophy. Whether you condone the initiation of violence is the thing that matters. And then you can suggest and you can try to, persuade people to live this way and not that way and whatever else. But that's unrelated. It's whether you use coercion or not. And so all the quote-unquote philosophies, all the political philosophies that have any sort of master plan, which is all of them except for voluntarism, those are all in one category. Those are all statism. Those are all control freakism, that this is how I want society to be formed. I want it to be forced to be this way. Because the only other option is, well, I just hope it's going to be this way. But that's not philosophy. That's just a hope. And so the people are like, I don't even know. I see all these 15-word long descriptions of a philosophy, and it gets more and more ridiculous and complicated. Usually that's just people making up excuses for not giving up their own degree of control freakism. Well, I used to be a this, now I'm a that, now I'm a this, that, and the other thing. Well, if you're not a voluntarist right now, you're a collectivist authoritarian of one flavor or another. You might mostly want to leave people in freedom and only violently dominate and control and rob them for a few little things over here, but you still advocate their forcible subjugation to a centralized master plan, which puts you in the category of statist, puts you in the statist camp. And so the thing that distinguishes voluntarism from all the others is it doesn't have a master plan, because voluntarists understand that the moment you accept, I don't get to commit aggression, you also have to accept, I don't get to force a master plan on anybody, which means any suffix to it becomes ridiculous. Like, no matter how much you really want people to be this, that, or the other thing, people saying, well, I'm an anarcho-Christian. Well, no, you're an anarchist who's a Christian. Like, unless you want Christianity forced on society, which the anarcho-Christians I know, the people who call themselves that, don't want it forced on people. In which case, well, it's unrelated. Like, you're an anarchist and you happen to have those beliefs over there, but that doesn't change the fact that you don't want a ruling class and you don't believe in coercion. The rest is just personal preferences and hopes and stuff. And voluntarists, it's the only category I know that accepts that you don't get to control that, so you might as well not even pretend it's a philosophy. Now, I'll throw in this thing, because I said I would mention it, about anarcho-capitalism, which to me is just sort of a weirdly redundant way to say voluntarist. Because what capitalism meant once upon a time, and what it means to those who say anarcho-capitalism, is a system of trade and ownership of stuff absent government violence. Well, that's already covered in the anarcho part. Like, you're basically saying, I don't want a ruling class, and I don't want a ruling class that interferes with economics. Like, well, if there isn't a ruling class, it's not interfering with anything. So it's redundant. The term anarcho-capitalist, it's why I don't usually use the term to describe myself, just because, I am that. Like, I match what most people who call themselves that believe, but I find the term just slightly weird because it's just redundant. Even that, people say, well, if you believe in property, blah, 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 it's still a matter of what do you as an individual human being think is the proper way to treat other human beings. If you believe in, hey, I need something, so I'm going to beat you up and steal your stuff, you're not an anarchist. Or you're at least not a voluntarist. To call yourself an anarcho-communist and then make excuses for being a thug and a thief because and because they have more than they need and from each according to his ability, yada, yada, yada. Okay, well, what you've just said is you believe in stealing crap if it serves your interests. Like, you just tried to veil it with some highfalutin philosophy, which it really isn't. And so the only philosophy that is, if you ask me, the only philosophy that's actually political philosophy that makes sense and is pure and consistent is the one that doesn't try to put a master plan on anybody else. And I'm not talking about adding hopes and dreams. Just, how do I think I should treat other people without violence? That's it. You know, inside that, there are 80 bajillion different alternatives and options and different possibilities of how people can deal with stuff. And I may relate to 1,000 different people in 1,000 different ways. None of them are going to be coercive, and that's the only commonality. And I'll end with this thing, which is that the moment you try to make a master plan, try to force a master plan, you eliminate all the other possibilities. And not only is that immoral, it's insanely arrogant to say, well, when it comes to this problem, everyone has to be forced to fund and go along with my solution to it. So you just ruled out a million other possibilities that people could have come up with. And the only philosophy that doesn't rule them out is voluntaryism, that says we're going to rule out coercion and we're going to leave absolutely anything that is consensual, that is voluntary, that isn't coercive, which leaves wide open the possibilities of how people can deal with it. And different people can deal in different ways, and it can be that way forever. People are going to have different lifestyles, live differently, have different kinds of houses, and nobody's trying to force a centralized plan on everybody else. And so it's really, when people try to complicate it, very quickly they usually demonstrate that what they're really doing is demonstrating they don't want to give up the illusion of control over other people. Well, I don't want a ruling class, but I want society to be like this, so I'm an anarcho-communist. Well, how do you think you're going to get it like that? Because I'm not going to do that voluntarily. I'm not a communist. I think it's a stupid, immoral idea. So what are you going to do with me? Are you just going to hope I'm going to change my mind? Or are you going to use violence to try to impose your master plan on me? So almost all of the other quote-unquote philosophies are just people making up excuses for not giving up their control freakism and their attempts to violently dominate their fellow man. And that, you know, it doesn't take long to, when you ask them, wait, how do you make this happen, that you can see that. Or sometimes you come to realize, oh, so you're just hoping it. Like there's a bunch of people who call themselves anarcho-communists who are actually anarcho-capitalists, because they say, well, I would have a little commune thing and we'd cooperate, but I wouldn't force other people to do that. And say, okay, well, technically that actually makes you an anarcho-capitalist, even though for yourself you would choose communal living, which is fine. I'm not gonna force you not to do that. I don't have a master plan that you have to go by. The only thing I advocate is don't commit aggression. And if you do, I advocate that force be used to stop you. But that's it. And so all of the other stuff, to me, it just stinks of people making up excuses for not letting go of the desire to forcibly control everybody else. Because then you just grasp, oh, well, then it's up to them what they're going to do. And I can wish and hope and suggest and predict, but it's not my call. It's not my decision. My decision is how do I treat other people? And how I treat other people is without coercion. And that's all voluntarism means. The bad news is It doesn't dictate solutions to every problem you can imagine. The good news is it leaves open an infinite number of possible solutions instead of trying to forcibly dictate any. So, all right, so that's my rant on that topic.